Hi everyone, it's Phil Frost from Main Street ROI, and I have Fred Valleys from Optimizer with me today. Welcome, Fred.
Hey Phil, good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this presentation. This is going to be about new Google AdWords features to improve your results. If you're using Google AdWords, you are, I'm sure, familiar with all of the latest changes, or you've at least heard about them, and it's hard to keep up. So I'm really excited for Fred to dig into all of these recent updates and how you can use them to improve your AdWords performance. And as a little bit of introduction, if you're not familiar with Fred, he's actually a former Google AdWords employee, and I believe, Fred, you were there helping them develop the AdWords editor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was there a really long time ago. At this point, it was 2002 when AdWords was not even that well known yet, and was there for 10 years. And I was basically hired because I speak Dutch. I'm originally from Belgium, so they needed someone who would come in and translate AdWords into its sixth language. And then eventually I got more into the product side of the business, and we met a lot of advertisers who just needed to make a lot of changes in their accounts, and it was very clunky and time-consuming to do that through the AdWords interface. So we had a small team of people that got together, and we decided to build the AdWords editor. So that was sort of my first big project, or one of the projects that people would remember really well. And then some of the other stuff I was involved in was the acquisition of a company called Urchin, nowadays, of course, known as Google Analytics. So, yeah,
I remember
it was
that.
a good time at Google.
Yeah, so I will, on behalf of everyone that's on today, I will thank you for creating the AdWords editor. I know that's a lifesaver for me and everyone on our team to be able to make bulk updates.
Yeah,
All right,
welcome.
so I will let you get started here. Looking forward to it, Fred.
Good. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about today was part of the Masters of PPC, so make sure everyone here becomes an expert, but take a look at some new Google AdWords features that can really help improve your results. And a big thank you, of course, to Phil and his team from Main Street ROI for promoting this event. I hope you'll all learn a good amount of stuff here. All right, okay, so a little too fast there. So like Phil was saying, my name is Frederick Valles. There's a picture of me. Don't wear glasses anymore, but for the rest, I look pretty much the same. Worked at Google for a long time, built the AdWords editor, but kind of to my surprise, after I left Google, I found that even with the AdWords editor and some of the tools that we built in AdWords, it was still very time-consuming to manage PPC. So that's what I actually started doing after I left Google. I started becoming a consultant. I also started blogging for Search Engine Land, and you can find me on Twitter right there. But as I was doing that consulting, I found it so time-consuming, and I started looking for a tool that was out there that would help make my life easier, and I couldn't quite find it. So I started writing a whole bunch of AdWords scripts, and we'll talk quite a bit about AdWords scripts today, what they are, how you can use them. But we turned that into a company. So nowadays we have a company called Optimizer. We've been recognized as one of the better PPC management tools that's out there. And honestly, the reason why a lot of people like us is because for the price, we offer a ton of functionality to compare to some of the others out there. So anyone who's looking for some help, I hope you'll take a look at that. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today was reporting. We'll talk about reporting, we'll talk about scripts, we'll talk about ad customizers. But just before we talk about reporting, I would love to hear from people how much time they are currently spending on doing reporting, either for your internal accounts or for your clients' accounts. And so, Phil, if you can pop up the poll right there. This is a question about how many hours per month you roughly spend doing reporting for each client that you have.
Okay, so I just displayed that.
Thank you. So we'll give people a minute. And Phil, I bet you guys do a lot of reporting, right? You guys manage AdWords accounts as well. So what does that look like for you?
I would say we're in the neighborhood of less than an hour, right around an hour.
So you guys got it down pretty well, so you must be using some good tools for that, some good automations. So let's take a look at what people have said. I certainly talked to customers of mine that went from spending 2 days a month doing reporting for all of their clients, and thanks to a tool really being able to bring it down to a much more manageable level, something to like a couple of hours at most. So, Phil, if you're able to wrap up that poll.
Yeah, let me close that down.
And there you got the results. Okay, so interesting. Most people are kind of in your group there, less than an hour a month, but a good number of people spend quite a bit more than that as well. And for those spending more than 5 hours per account per month, that's certainly feel sorry for you because that's a lot of time. So let's go back here. Let me see if I can actually get my presentation back on the screen. Okay, there we go. So if you let me know if you can see that again. But
I do not
okay.
see it on my screen.
Oh, you do not see it. Okay, so that's the joys of switching in and out of polls. So we'll go back to what you should be seeing, which is this. Okay, and does that look better?
I still don't see it, but maybe everyone else does. I'm seeing kind of that first screen before you share your screen. There we go. Now it's loading. Okay,
so if it's loading, okay. Anyway, and I know what's on the slide, so I'll keep talking because these first few are not that important. But again, the topics that I'm excited about for 2017 when it comes to AdWords is Data Studio. So Data Studio is not actually an AdWords tool, but I think it has huge implications on reporting. And given how much time people spend on that, I just wanted to show it to you because it's a new free solution from Google that has some pretty awesome capabilities. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is if functions for creating more relevant ads. So this is a way for you to show different ads when people are on mobile devices, show different ads based on what audience list someone is on. And all of that used to be really complicated, but Google has made it much, much easier thanks to the introduction of if functions. So I'll tell you what those are. And then one of my favorite topics is PPC automation. How do you become more efficient with any task related to AdWords? And I'll give you some examples from AdWords scripts and hopefully get your thoughts flowing, and maybe you'll come out with some really interesting things that you can do yourselves. But so before we talk about reporting and the Data Studio tool that's out there, I really wanted to talk about some of the common reporting mistakes that I see people make. So at Optimizer, we have a ton of accounts connected to it. We see a lot of people doing reporting. And we try to make it really easy for people to do the right thing, but we still see people do the wrong thing in some cases. And so one of the things that I most commonly see is people insist on sending the reports on the first day of the month, and oftentimes they even generate the report like the first hour of the month. Well, if you're sending reports too soon, you run into issues because conversions, the key thing that you probably care about, don't really show up in AdWords that quickly. So number one, there's reporting delays in AdWords. They've gotten much better, but it can be a couple of hours. Number two, there's reporting delays if you're importing your conversion data from Google Analytics. And that can actually be really significant. I've seen big accounts that I've touched where it takes 4 days for the data to be moved from GA into AdWords. So that's literally 4 days of sales data you would not have. And keep in mind, a month is 31 days. So if you're missing 4 days, well, your results in and of themselves will be less than 10%, will be 10% worse just because you're missing 4 days of data. And then what's illustrated here on this graphic is that some accounts, even if the conversions are being reported into AdWords on a pretty fast schedule, sometimes it just takes people more than 12 days to actually convert after they click on the ad. And so here we have an account. These guys are selling T-shirts. And so for T-shirts, they see that a lot of the sales happen very quickly. And these tend to be consumers buying 1 or 2 T-shirts. But the corporate orders, the big orders, the multi-thousand-dollar orders, they actually take a long time. People shop around, they consider it a bit more. And so a lot of these conversions, almost 50% of them happen after more than 12 days. So if you're reporting too quickly, you basically can only hurt yourself by underreporting what you've done. So that's mistake number one. So generally there I recommend send your reports on the 3rd of the month, not sooner. Okay, now the second mistake is once you have a reporting tool, whether it's Optimizer or Data Studio or the AdWords functionality itself, really think about what you're going to visualize, right? So oftentimes people just look at a visualization and they say, oh, well, that's got sort of the data in it that I want, so let's just put that on there. Well, if you show a table like this to someone where you're reporting by device and you're saying what is the conversion value divided by cost, that number, by the way, that's return on ad spend, roughly, right? So a return on ad spend of 1.52 on tablets, that's pretty horrible compared to computers. That's significantly lower. Okay, so that's 25% worse. So if you show that to a stakeholder, your client, your boss, they might say, well, hey, what's going on? Why are you managing tablets so poorly? Okay, so now you've just opened up a whole can of worms, but really, what you should have shown is the same data but presented a different way. This is the exact same data, but now we've put it into a donut chart. And so what stands out now is when we look at device distribution, the blue section here, this is computer. So it tells us, well, we're spending most of our money cost on computers. We're also getting the majority of conversion value from computers. So things are going really well when it comes to that. And mobile devices, the red chunk, okay, 38% of cost, 36% of value. So, okay, mobile is converting a little bit less well than the desktop is. And then there's this orange section. It's really not that big. It's tablets. Okay, so let's not worry about that. And so you've done the exact opposite from the previous slide, because in the previous slide you were drawing attention to the worst thing on the page, which was tablets, but you didn't give the context of how much volume that represented. And that, all in all, is actually not that big of a part of the business. So by showing this visualization instead, you could get someone to focus on the fact that you're doing really well in the biggest arenas that you're playing in. So choose your visuals very carefully. Now, the next mistake is that averages lie. So we have a visualization in Optimizer that helps you answer questions like, why did my metrics or my performance change? So here we're asking the question, why did conversions 30 days versus 30 days change? Okay, so we say conversions are driven by clicks. They're also driven by conversion rate. So the fact that the conversions are up here is largely thanks to conversion rate improvements. And that's despite clicks being down. Okay, so why are clicks down? Well, impressions are down 32%. But wait a minute, AdWords, when you look at impressions, there's actually a huge difference in impressions between the Google Display Network and the Google Search Network. So if I break that out and I look a little bit more closely, you're going to see here on the right-hand side, we're talking about display impressions being lost. 162 million are lost on the Display Network. Only 112 million on the Search Network. So in this case, it actually ends up being fairly close percentage-wise, but in some cases, just changing a few settings on the Display Network can actually have a huge impact on the impressions for your business. So if you're not looking at those subsegments, you're actually looking at averages that don't tell you anything meaningful, not something that's highly actionable. Okay, so if we take GDN out of that equation right there, the numbers look a little bit different. Now, some common segments that people really should look at is branded versus non-branded campaigns. What are the different networks you're running on? So like in this case, GDN versus Google Search or Search Network. But also the different devices, the different hours of the week, the different audiences. There's all these levels of segmentation that are going to get you to much more meaningful insights. So try to use those. And then the sad news, and this is especially sad for those people who spend more than 5 hours a month generating reports. When we looked at Optimizer's data, we saw that of all the reports that we generate, 99% of those are never opened. Actually, those numbers have gotten a little bit better recently, right? So as we started talking about this, I think people have been pushing more on their customers and their stakeholders to actually look at the report. But by and large, reports are kind of a safety, if you will. So the client, the stakeholder insists that you have reports available to them because they want to know they have access to it. It doesn't mean they're actually going to look at it. But if 1 month the results are not as good as they were hoping, okay, they want to know they have a report that they can go to. That's when they look at them. So, but what we would like to see is that reports actually become much more useful, that you start doing some of the underlying things more right, so that people will actually look at them as a very useful thing. Now, when it comes to reporting, of course, it's full of trade-offs, right? So you're trading off time and money. So if you're automating with a tool to help you save time when it comes to reporting, you're usually paying money for that tool. Now, if you want to do it the free way and you save some money, then it's just going to take you more time to do the manual reporting. By the way, when you do reporting, I think it's also really important that you try to set the tone with your client ahead of time. So don't wait for them to tell you what needs to be in the report. Give them a report and tell them why the data that's in there is actually the right data for them to be considering. Because if you leave it up to the client, then you get into those situations where everybody's going to ask for custom reports. And every time it becomes custom, that's when it starts being this huge time drain and becomes really hard to automate. Whereas if you get everybody on the same page, wanting the same data, understanding why that data is the right level of data, that's going to put you in a better position to save time on reporting and actually be able to spend more time optimizing the account, improving the account. And if the account gets better, people probably will look at the reports less because things are going well. They don't need to double check your work. Okay, so that's sort of what's going on in there. Now, as far as that trade-off between time and money, the good news is there are actually a number of free tools out there that can help you with reporting for PPC and AdWords. So AdWords campaigns can do it, but they're kind of clunky. They're mostly sharing data tables, so the visuals are not that strong. In the case of the AdWords Report Builder, there are nice visuals, but you can only do one visual at a time. So it's honestly not really a report. It's more of a unique insight. And sending 20 different insights by email, that's unlikely that anyone's really going to pay attention to that. Okay, so that's AdWords campaigns and AdWords reports. Google Analytics, they do have a dashboarding capability, but it is somewhat limited in terms of how many widgets you can put on the page. And so it's also not that easy to schedule it and email it to everyone. Now, the one that I'm excited about, I want to talk about today is, as of last month, Data Studio is completely free. So this was this amazing tool that Google launched about a year ago, but the restriction was people could only have 5 free reports. Now, for many of us, 5 reports is not enough. And if you wanted to get to have more reports, it was super, super expensive. I can't even remember what the price was, but I think it was more than $10,000 a month, right? So not something most of us would easily consider. But now they said, well, hey, let's make Data Studio free, so it's actually worth taking some time to take a look at. So the pros of Data Studio is that it's highly customizable. You can put in your own fonts, your own colors, your own logos. You can white label with your own images. You can create dashboards that are multiple pages long, and it has really strong integrations with all of the Google products. So AdWords MCC data, individual AdWords accounts data, Google Analytics, Search Console, which is where you pull your SEO data, YouTube, Bigtable. Bigtable is like a big database type thing, so you can put in your own data from other sources and then render that in the report. And you can even have generic connectors like MySQL, so it can connect directly into your company database. Now, on the con side, you have no integrations with Bing Ads, none with Facebook and other Google competitors. So those are the types of integrations that are not likely to come out anytime soon. You cannot white label as far as putting a custom domain on it. So if you send this sort of a report to a stakeholder or a client, it is going to be very obvious to them it was generated with Data Studio, right? So if you wanted to white label it and make it look like it was highly custom for you, that's not going to be there. You cannot share it on an automatic schedule. It's more of a dashboard. And so dashboards and reports are two different things, right? A dashboard is a place where you could go anytime to get your questions answered, whereas a report tends to be something that's scheduled and gets sent to you on a recurring basis. So this is more of a dashboard, so it means people would come to it whenever they want to, as opposed to get a link to an updated report at the beginning of the next month. And then currently there's also a limitation that you cannot share this with people who do not have a Gmail or a Google for Work account. So people need to have a Google account to be able to access what you are sharing with them. So I talked to Google about this. They expect to change that, but for now that's a pretty big limitation for someone who doesn't necessarily run a Gmail account, for example. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things you could do with Data Studio and some of the things I've done. So you can create an MCC dashboard. Now, the thinking here is we've all seen the MCC dashboard inside of AdWords. So if you have multiple accounts, it's a really nice visualization with a table of all of the accounts that you manage. A lot of people really like it. Managers especially want to see this. But the thing is, no account manager wants to give some random manager access to the AdWords account to be able to see that data table, because the risk is they're going to go and explore the rest of AdWords. They're maybe going to see things, they're going to change them, and the next thing you know, they've actually made tweaks in your account that they didn't tell you about, and now the performance is starting to change. So that's pretty risky. But what you can do with something like Data Studio is populate your own MCC dashboard. Straight up pulling AdWords data, put one line for each account on here, and then you can even pull big metrics like these big KPIs like cost and conversions. You can choose which ones to include. You can do a date range comparison, so you can say month over month the performance of this, 8% fewer conversions, but also 28% less cost. And then you can make that easily available to any of your stakeholders. And so the way that you go about building this is you get a canvas like this. So I would grab one of the visualization widgets at the top. So in this case, I would grab a table like that one right there, can drag it onto the page, and then I have a lot of options as far as what data to include. So I've got my data source. So here I've selected AdWords, and then really cool, I can do lots of dimensions and lots of metrics. By the way, dimension is something that will add one additional line onto the report. So right now we just have the account name as the dimension. So that means that for each account, we're going to get some of those numbers showing up on there. Now, the next thing that you get is the metrics. So the metrics are going to populate additional columns. So you can do something like 10 metrics and as well as 10 dimensions. So you can really start to slice this data very, very specifically. It's pretty cool. Now, as far as the data that you can bring in and pull into the system, this is how you connect up to it. So you say, find me a data source, and then Google shows you all of the connectors that you have available. So it could be anything from a manual file upload to a direct connection into AdWords. And here I can choose between individual accounts or manager accounts. And then so long as the accounts have the same currency, I can select which accounts those are. See a short list right there. And then I can say connect that, and then that's going to bring that data into the Google system. So you see some of the other connectors right there. And again, it's very strong on the Google side. Google Sheets I like a lot, because with Google Sheets you can populate them with whatever data you want, and then you can make it nicely integrated into that dashboard. Now, as far as spicing up your tables, if you just show a data table with lots of numbers, it's still kind of hard to interpret, right? I mean, you could go into AdWords and see that same table, but what if you could do something like this, where some of the metrics you actually show as a little bar chart, so you get a visual indicator of how big these numbers are. What about color coding and like heat mapping? So the more clicks you have, the more green a field becomes, and the more red this becomes, the worse the cost per conversion. So here I can see one of my biggest performing campaigns, most clicks, also has some of the worst cost per conversion. So that might be something for me to take a look at and go and optimize. So that's what you can do. Now, how do you do this? You go into the table settings, and for each column that you have, it has some options. So here I'm picking column number 1 in that visualization, and I've changed that to a bar visualization. Okay, and then I can choose the associated color with it, as well as show the number, and then do some other little tweaks there. And then I can do the heat mapping next. So I pick column number 2, and there I say the visualization is going to be heat map with green color. So the higher the number, the greener that field is going to be. And then in column number 3, I've done the same thing, but I've picked the red color for that. So a great way to jazz up those tables a bit. Now, if you wanted to include third-party data, a lot of people have call tracking vendors that are outside of AdWords. So what if you wanted to include that in reports? You can also do that with Data Studio. So here's a visualization that shows us the number of calls for every day, and we also show a grand total on that visualization. So there's actually 2 ways that you can achieve this. The first way, and the way that we've done it in the past, is using a service called Zapier and AdScripts. Now, Zapier, that's a paid service, but it's a service that will take your information from one of the call tracking vendors and populate it into some other system. And so here we've chosen to take every call that comes in and put it on a Google spreadsheet. And then we've used AdScripts here to make a new drop-down menu on that Google spreadsheet, where we can choose how to do the aggregation. So do we want to aggregate these individual calls on a weekly or a monthly basis? So we've written some code to do that. AdScripts, by the way, that's a free tool from Google. So you can build that for Google Docs, Google Sheets, all sorts of systems. You can really do a lot of very cool automations. And then what comes out of that is now a monthly aggregation. So for each of the months, we've totaled up our numbers, and that produces this data, which can then be fed into the Data Studio system to visualize it in a much nicer format than just a table. Now, the second option that you have is you can just pull the raw data, still coming from Zapier, but we're going to do the aggregation through Data Studio. So as opposed to having to write an app script, and as opposed to having to write our own JavaScript code, what we do here is we use Data Studio to do the aggregation. So how that works is we created a new field. We called it call count. Sorry, I thought I was going to zoom in on that. But we call it call count. And then we say that's a formula field. So we're going to do the count of how many fields have the same date value. So that's going to do the totaling for you. Now, you can do other calculations. And so we're staying with the custom formulas here. But what if I wanted to show a report that said how many active ad groups I have, how many keywords with different quality score levels, and then color code that, right? So The way that we've gone about that is totaling up the number of ad groups is we've again made a new custom field, very easy to do in Data Studio. So you literally say, make a new calculated field, you give it a name, and then you put in what the formula is. And the system will actually help you build out that formula. So we would say count of the number of ad groups, and then that's how that comes back with 32. We actually ran a filter on top of that as well, so we said only the active ones. So that's how we get that precise number. And then we have other formula fields like max, min, average, a whole number of capabilities there. The other thing you can do with calculated fields is remove some of the structural naming conventions that you have. Now, for any of you doing AdWords using methodologies like single keyword ad groups, alpha beta structure, peel and stick structure, there's all these structures out there that people like to follow for AdWords, and oftentimes that means that you're going to have multiple campaigns that basically advertise the same thing, but maybe the match types are different, or maybe and there's other slight differences. But so if you show that to a manager and they see, oh, well, there's 5 campaigns all selling the same thing. In this case, it's 2 campaigns basically selling the same thing, but the difference is one is a beta campaign and the other is an alpha campaign for the same products. Okay, well, they don't care about that level of detail. So what we've been able to do by renaming the fields and removing the alpha and the beta from it is give you a consolidated number that says this is the actual number of clicks for that product line, and that's typically what a manager would care about much more. So the nice thing is you've removed all the structural elements of AdWords, and you're able to give a report in a way that makes much more sense to a stakeholder. Okay, so you can see then how that comes together into a single line. Okay, so Phil, were there any burning questions on the topic of Data Studio, or should I go on to Ad Customizers?
Just one question from John here. He wants to know if we're going to get the copies of the slides.
Yeah, we'll share the video actually. So that will have the slides in it, but not the slides themselves. John, if you have any specific slides you were hoping to get, I know some of them had a little bit more text. I'll pop up my email address at the end of the presentation. It's frederick@optimizer.com. We're happy to share little snippets of code or whichever slides you were interested in. But yeah, let's talk about Ad Customizer. So this is about if functions, and so the whole topic here, and the reason I'm excited is these are all different people, right? And actually, they're not that diverse. I was looking for better representation of who lives in the United States, but still, every person is different. Every person has different goals, different things they think about, and so when we're marketing to them as marketers, we should actually have different messages based on what device they're on, what interactions they may have had with our website, with our business in the past. And now you can much more easily do that with audience and devices. Now, in the past, you could also do this with business data. If you haven't looked at Google Business Data and Ad Customizers, it's a really powerful way to have ads customized on the fly based on certain criteria, like what's the location of the user, what kind of promotions are going on, what types of products are you selling. And you could also use it to do something like showing different ads to mobile and desktop users. And that used to be very easy before expanded text ads came out, or became the norm this year. It was simply a checkbox on the ad creation screen that said, this is my mobile preferred ad. Well, that option has actually gone away. So the only way for people nowadays to say, I want to show a different ad text to someone on a mobile device was to create a spreadsheet file where you had a device preference column, and then you would have to say mobile or all. And then in your ad text, you would have to use this special formula to say, pull from my data, headline 1. And then the system would know, was this a mobile device or a desktop device, and it would pull the corrective version depending on what it was. Okay, so that was all. It was possible, but it was pretty clunky. Now, Google came out with something much easier. They call it if functions. Now, what's an if function, first of all? So most of us deal with if functions pretty much on a daily basis when we go through a stoplight. So if that light is green, well, then it means go. If the light is yellow, then it means okay, you can sort of decide. And if the light is red, then we all know we should be stopping, right? Each one of those is an if-then statement. So if this happens, then that's what we're supposed to do. And this is the same thing that AdWords does now. So in AdWords, it looks more like this. It says, if the first possible condition is true, then go ahead and do this. And then they have a default fallback. So if that condition was not true, then go and do something else to go do the default thing. So why is this useful? Well, it's useful because when it comes to showing different ads on different devices, the attribute we're looking for is whether something is mobile. So we're saying if the device equals mobile, insert the text to insert, and otherwise insert the default text. Okay, so an example would be if device is mobile, then we'll say quick, easy mobile booking, and otherwise we'll just say best price guarantee. Now that's pretty cool, but it's even cooler when you can do it with audiences. So if you've been building audience lists through AdWords, you can say if the person looking at my ad is in a certain user list, okay, so one of these two user lists, then this is the text I want to show, otherwise show them a different text. Okay, so for example, if my audience, so if the person is on my list of returning visitors or cart abandoners, give them a 30% discount and otherwise offer them a 25% discount. So a really good way to re-engage with people who've been to your site before. So here is another very specific example. Say you sell kids basketball shoes. So on a mobile device, you could say if the device is mobile, then we're going to have a piece of text that says free shipping on mobile orders. Otherwise, we're going to say buy now. So here at the top, you see the mobile variation of the ad, which now has that mobile ad text inserted. On a computer, they're going to see the much simpler buy now. So this is cool because it enables you to be much more efficient when you're creating these different ad text variations. It enables it to, it makes it very easy to do A/B testing. And so it's very similar to ad customizers, except you don't have to go through the whole hassle of setting up a spreadsheet and managing that spreadsheet, which honestly is quite a bit of work if you go that route. Now you can write these things right into the ad text. So how do you get started with this? Very, very easy. Just go to make a new text ad, and in any line of text, go ahead and type in a squiggly bracket, and then you're going to get a drop-down that shows the different options available to you. There is also the countdown, which counts down to a specific date. That's a pretty old functionality at this point, so that's why I'm not covering it. But the if function right there, that's brand new. And then the oldest insertion, of course, is dynamic keyword insertion, so that's now also supported kind of in a field, in a UI that helps you construct the correct thing. So that's how you go about this. All right, so Phil, I'll keep going here unless there were any burning questions on that section right there. But I want to take maybe 10 or so minutes now to show you a few things you can automate in AdWords thanks to AdWords scripts. Okay, so why even talk about automation, right? So here's a picture from Hidden Figures. It was an Oscar-nominated movie this year. And I thought it was really interesting because back in the day when they were sending John Glenn to be the first American to orbit the Earth, they needed to do a lot of calculations to make sure that that rocket came back to the right place. And obviously they were using computers to do those calculations. But it actually turns out that when they were using computers, they didn't mean computers the way you and I mean it today. It was actually a person. They had people that were called computers because they were very good at computing things. So you see in this room here, all of these men in white shirts, they're basically the engineers, but they had this black woman who was very good at math, and she was the one running calculations and computing that all of their calculations were correct and that they were going to land in the correct spot. The whole program couldn't have happened without these human computers. And then eventually, of course, they put in the IBM 7090 mainframe, and so things started to run much faster. But now, automation is not all it's cracked up to be all the time either, right? So Tesla, Autopilot, well, you don't pay attention, stuff like this can still happen. So automation is not always a walk in the park either. So the best thing we can do is combining automation with the things that we do as humans. So what does that mean for PPC? What could we automate in our PPC management strategies? So think about stuff like the weather. How does the weather impact the things that you and your business sell? This is the classic example, by the way. Some people may be sick and tired of hearing about how rain affects what you sell, but it is a great example. I mean, and even if you don't know whether rain impacts what you sell, there's actually systems now like the Google Prediction API that can help you find correlations in the data that would tell you that, hey, yes, maybe there is a 5% impact on what you sell, and maybe that means you should change your bids by 5%. So that's one example. Another example that maybe is a little bit more real and something I've worked on was working with a ticket broker and figuring out, depending on the day of when the tickets go on sale for an event, what does that mean for the prices that we're going to fetch on the secondary market? So what we found is tickets sell really well, very close to the date that they go on sale, but oftentimes these tickets go on sale months before the event happens, and then for months there's really not much happening, there's not much activity of people buying, But then as you get really close to the event, all of a sudden the interest spikes again, and figuring out what are those times and automatically starting to change bids based on what we had figured out. That would have been a Goliath task to do manually, but through something like automated scripts, we were able to do it much more easily. So what are these scripts? These scripts are much like AdScripts. So I've made one reference to scripts in this presentation already, but it's basically a piece of JavaScript code that you can host inside of AdWords itself. And Google has its own flavor of JavaScript where they've already predefined a number of things. So as opposed to having to write every piece of code from scratch, Google has these constructs so they can say, give me the keywords for the account, and it's very easy. It's literally one line to get all the keywords from the account. And then you could say, find me now all the keywords that meet certain conditions, like they have more than 50 clicks and they have no conversions, and then maybe I want to automatically decrease the bids of those. So that's something you could do. Now, hopefully not everybody's heading for the doors, but when I start talking about scripting and coding, people often think this is not for me. Well, if you know how to hit the Control-C and the Control-V buttons on your computer, you can pretty much get started with scripts now, because a lot of people like myself have written scripts that you can just copy and paste, and with a few very small settings changes, you can actually make it do exactly what you want to do. And the reason that I find this exciting is I'll give you the code that does what I think you should do. But if you disagree and you want to take it one step further, you can actually tweak that code. So you don't have to do things my way, but I've already given you the baseline. So rather than you writing 1,000 lines of code, which might be a pretty big task, well, maybe you take my 1,000 lines and you change 10 lines within that, and now it does exactly what you want it to do. And it's actually pretty accessible to marketers. I just did a session at SMX, Search Marketing Expo in San Jose last week, and two of my co-presenters were non-technical people, and they had actually gone and figured out how to write scripts for themselves and done some pretty cool proof of concepts that the engineering teams at their companies then picked up, and because they fully understood what the marketer was trying to achieve and what the code was looking like, they were able to build it in something that could be run across the whole business. So what are a couple of things you could do with scripts? Well, another kind of new thing in AdWords, I don't know if you've seen it, but if you go to the Opportunities tab, you now have a Google AdWords Health Score. So in this case, it's an 81%, and then Google says, well, you could actually improve it by 7% by adding 4 call-out extensions to certain ad groups or to this campaign. You could create an ad in one non-serving ad group because it has no ads currently. So all of these things, they're interesting, right? But you may be so busy that you don't necessarily want to come back into this tool on a periodic basis. Maybe you have some other people helping you with PPC. So wouldn't it be nicer if you could take these tasks and put them right there in a task manager? Well, you can totally do that with AdWords scripts. So the AdWords script can look at the AdWords account. It can say, find me campaigns that have fewer than 4 site link extensions, and then put a to-do item on the to-do list of my junior account manager, right, or on my own to-do list. And now, rather than me having to keep going back to different AdWords pages, it's right there in my to-do list, and I can know exactly when it's been checked off and done. Bid automation, that's another big one, right? So there's a lot of companies that will sell you bid management solutions. A lot of these are black box systems. Google obviously has really good flexible bid strategies, which are completely free to use. They will help you hit a target CPA, a target return on ad spend. But the thing that people sometimes complain about is it's black box. You have no clue what Google's doing other than you saying my cost per acquisition target is 25. You don't know what Google is doing with that. So if your landing page goes down for a couple of hours, your conversion rate is going to be affected by that. Does Google know that my landing page went down, or are they going to think that all of a sudden my conversion rate is just terrible, and are they going to decrease my bids and kind of let my ads linger on page 2 of the search results and hence cause me to lose a tremendous amount of traffic? So with bid automation through AdWords scripts, on the other hand, you can see what the logic is. You can go through the logic that someone like me has written, and you can tweak it. So you can say, well, if we shouldn't be just looking at conversions and lost impression share due to rank, but we should also look at average position before we increase a bid. Great. Go and add one line of code that says also consider average position, and now it's going to work exactly the way that you think it should work. Ad text optimization. A lot of companies want to run different ads depending on what the holiday is, right? So for Valentine's Day, they want to show this kind of an ad, and then for President's Day, it's basically the same ad, but with a different holiday in the headline. Well, how do you maintain a calendar with this? Well, most people already have Google Calendar, and Google Calendar already has the US holidays or the holidays from other countries. And so what you can do is you can literally write a piece of AdWords script that says, look at the calendar of holidays, figure out what the name of the holiday is, and if today is a holiday, then bring up an ad where the headline is the name of the holiday. Very simple to do. Now, this is using a standard calendar, but what if you had a promotional calendar? Do you want to work with your promotions team and make sure that they tell you the Friday before that there's going to be a 20% sale and blah, blah, blah. And kind of the more that people have to talk to each other, the more balls are going to get dropped. Whereas if you said, hey, here's a Google Calendar, can you just put your whole year's promotions on here? Or whenever we get close, put the promotion on there. And then you have a script that automatically goes and looks at that spreadsheet, automatically brings up the correct ad text. And you don't even care at that point if it's a promotion that's going to run Sunday from midnight until Sunday at the end of the day. You don't have to go into the office to make sure these ads are running because the script is going to handle it for you. So you actually get to take your Sunday off. So that's another cool use case. Now, a couple of scripts that I've recently written, maintaining stacked bids. So some people in AdWords, they really like to make sure that the more specific match type variation of a keyword always has a higher bid. And kind of the reasoning behind that is you figure that the closer the search that the user did is to the keyword that you had, the more likely they are to convert. So presumably you can bid more for that. Now, if you use any sort of automations, sometimes these bids get out of whack, right? So if you were running some bid management logic, like we just talked about, I said, well, decrease this bid by 20%. Well, all of a sudden, it now is possible that your phrase match bid is higher than your exact match bid, and that may be undesirable. So you can run a secondary script that looks for these situations, puts it all into a Google spreadsheet where you can review it, and then you can bulk upload all of the suggested changes back into AdWords. So there's a link to that script right there. And then Google's big news in the last couple of weeks here about keeping exact match exact. So exact match is becoming somewhat broader again. We're going to do close variations when there's like function words added or removed, or when the words are flipped around. Okay, so exact match no longer means what it used to. So it becomes more and more important to do good search query management. But you can also go on search engine land. This is somebody else who wrote the script, but there is a script that will try to keep exact match exact by putting in negative keywords for all of these variations that Google may now consider to be an exact match. So those are some of the things I think about when it comes to AdWords. So hopefully you'll pick up some of these and got some new ideas from it. But if you have any questions or you want to get a slide or some pieces of code, feel free to email me at frederick@optimizer.com. So with that, Phil, let's turn it over to questions for maybe 10 minutes or so if people want.
Perfect. Thank you, Fred. That was awesome. I'll start with a comment from Herschel. Exceptionally well organized and presented webinar. Thank you, Fred. So a lot of folks just writing and saying thanks. And then we did have some questions. One from Dave. Where is the documentation for AdScripts?
Yeah, so AdWords scripts, basically Google it, right? So look for AdWords scripts solutions, and it's part of the Google developer website. The documentation is actually fantastic, Dave. So they have really good solutions. They have really good examples. And so where I would start is on the solutions page. The solutions page, Google has taken something like 20 different methodologies and written the entire script for it. So literally all you have to do is copy and paste the code that they've given you. And generally in the first 10 or so lines of that code, they're going to have a little explanation that says, change this setting to do this, or change that setting to do something else. So, and then you just copy and paste it into your AdWords bulk operation section under AdWords scripts. And then you can just start running it. One thing I didn't point out is that these scripts, so they run by themselves on a schedule that you define. So you can run it as often as once per hour, or as little as like once a month. So some of the scripts that we see a lot of success with are checking for broken landing pages. That happens completely automatically once a day. We have a different script to help people stay within their budget. So once an hour, it will check, have we spent more than the allowed budget for this entire account? And if so, then it automatically pauses everything that's live at that point. And then it even unpauses it at the beginning of the next month. So that's the kind of thing you'd want to do hourly. And then some other things like we have scripts that generate a report of the most popular ad text components, right? So what is my most or best performing headline 1? What's my best performing headline 2? That's the kind of stuff we run maybe once a week so that we always have access to it at the time that we're ready to go and make some new text ads.
Okay, great. And David, a different Dave here, had another question. He said, one of the biggest problems is Google never shows examples of the code in context. If this does that, it would be great to start seeing cause and effect and then build on it. And he's asking, are there examples available?
Yeah. If this is a question about ad customizers, I'm assuming. And so there's a couple of places this might be a question about, right? But if you want to clarify, please do so. But otherwise, I'll assume it's for ad customizers. So yeah, that's a good point. They don't show you exactly if a person was on this audience, what would the ad look like. I'm not sure they're building something for that. And it's kind of the same problem that existed with dynamic keyword insertion. You know, you couldn't really simulate the ad and say what would show up if the user searched for X, which is actually pretty important when it comes to broad matches, because if you have several broad match keywords that could match to whatever the user was searching for, it is going to make a difference to what shows up in the ad text. And so I'm not saying, and this is important, I'm not saying that Google inserts the query that the user did. They never do that. But they will insert the keyword, and so that could be a broad match. That's maybe not semantically the most relevant to what the user typed in, and so understanding that would be beneficial. Now, this is actually again where scripts could come in and actually be quite helpful. So you could say, run me a script and populate a spreadsheet with every single keyword and map that against the ad text that was shown, and then you could do an automatic insertion because you knew what the keyword was. And so even within one ad group where different keywords trigger different ads, you could get a pretty nice output that says, okay, here's kind of a variety of ads that I've shown. Maybe you sort them by highest click number, and you see if anything looks wonky, and then if it does, you know to split it out and maybe control the matching a little bit more tightly.
Okay. And I had a follow-up question about the if statements in the ad copy. What are the reporting functionalities around that? Do you get to see? It sounds like you don't get to see what different versions were displayed and how that performance might have varied.
Yeah. So good question. So I'm actually going to load up the AdWords Scripts page because I think this is something that people are somewhat interested in. So here's the Google developers page for that. That's always my starting point. And so what's actually really cool about scripts is that they have access to all the underlying AdWords data that tends to live in the API, the application programming interface, as well as in reports. So when you and we go to the AdWords interface, the reports that they show us are the reports that they've chosen to show us. So that's a subset of everything that's out there. And so saying, oh, show me each keyword in combination with the ad text that I've actually run for that keyword, as opposed to all the ad text from the whole ad group, that is not something that's really supported in AdWords. But it's a really good question. It's something you probably could use to do an optimization. So when you come to AdWords scripts, you can pull in some reports. And let's see if I can actually find where these reports are. But so the reports have access to something like, I think, 80 different reporting sets, and you can pull multiple of them, and then you can do the join, so you can figure out when was the ID of the keyword the same in the ad text report and the keyword performance report. And so now you can start to do all of these things you would normally have to do in Excel through VLOOKUPs and all kinds of complicated macros. You can do it through a script. And of course, the beauty of a script is once you've written it one time, you put it on a schedule, and now you get that data on a monthly basis. Okay, so here we got some of the AdWords reports that are out there. Let's see, it's actually a terrible page, so that's the blog. But the key point is there's all of these reports out there, and so you can actually pull them in through scripts. And then the previous question to go back to from David was actually more scripts related. So Google does have a preview capability in scripts. So when you take a script that somebody else has written, it's really important that you preview it, and then Google will say, okay, based on what the script is supposed to do, here's what we would have changed. So here's a budget, the old budget and the new budget. It's really important that you look at that and make sure it seems to do what you wanted it to do. And once you're really comfortable, that's when you turn it on and you put it on autopilot.
Okay, great. Yeah, you just answered Dave's follow-up question there, which was how do you test AdWords scripts before rolling them out into production?
Yeah, and so even if you do
preview one time.
Exactly. So preview it one time, but then I also recommend that for every time you have a script that's going to make changes in your account, also use a script that checks for unusual behavior. Okay, so I'll show you the solution section. So we support the script in Optimizer through the enhanced scripts functionality that we have, which makes it a little bit easier to install. But Google has this account anomaly detector. And now this is really cool because what it does, we just simply could not do as humans ourselves manually. So it says right now it's Tuesday in California, it's about 10 o'clock in the morning. So on a typical Tuesday by 10 o'clock in the morning, how many clicks, costs, and impressions would we expect? We compare that to the current information, and if it's more than, say, 10% above or below what we would expect, it sends a notification email to me, and it says, hey, something's weird here. Okay, so if you've used the script, and even though you ran the preview and you made sure that it was doing what it was supposed to do, I mean, God knows at some point Google makes a change on the back end and things change and they don't do exactly what you were expecting. Maybe your campaigns get turned off when they weren't supposed to be turned off. Well, now you'll get an email within a couple of hours that says, well, we were actually expecting you to have about 20 clicks by now, and it looks like you haven't had any today, so go and take a look and check out what's going on. So rather than having these issues, which will come up invariably, but rather than waiting 3 days to figure it out, now you'll figure it out within a couple of hours and really minimize any of the impact that you'll see.
Okay, cool. So I had a question related to the if statements again. I guess it's just, Fred, based on your preferences, do you tend to use a lot of if statements in your ads, or what I've done is basically break out campaigns by device or by audience, versus it sounds like you can just have a campaign targeting all devices, all the different audiences, and then have one ad with the different if statements. Do you have a preference or recommendation on how to structure that?
Yeah, it depends on how much complexity you want to manage. So obviously the moment that you triplicate your campaigns once for each device type, now you're managing 3 things. And so if you find a good keyword or a good negative keyword, you simply have to remember to put it in all 3 places most likely. Right. And usually that is easiest if you have a tool that supports keeping those copies in sync with each other. So for most people, it probably makes sense to have a single campaign and then use the bid adjustments that you can do all the way down to the ad group level, and then also use the if functions. Now, the if functions only became available after people were forced onto expanded text ads. So the reality is some people probably made those duplicate campaigns because that was the only option to maintain that difference. It's also really important to ask yourselves, does it make a difference in performance to have different mobile ad text? So for some people, it certainly will, but the reason that Google pulled it out of the interface, I asked them about this, and they said, well, it's because the vast majority of people don't use this, right? So, and that's not to say there's not performance benefits from it. It's just something that people didn't think was important enough or was too time-consuming, so they didn't do it, even when there was a simple checkbox in the UI to have a different mobile variation of the ad text. So yeah, and then I've seen people who run the ads for their own business, and that's their sole job, right? They are the PPC and the online marketing manager. That's what they do full-time. Yeah, then you can probably split it into 3 campaigns, and maybe even have different campaigns for New York and California. So now you have 6 campaigns, 1 for each device type. So if you're willing to have that overhead and you can support it in your business, then yeah, by all means, that's more specificity can give you better results. but you often have to weigh it off or trade it off versus will I actually still be doing the right things? Because if I'm not even doing A/B testing for the ad groups I have today, am I really going to do it once I have 3 times as many? And so will I actually lose by not focusing on more of the more important things like A/B testing for ads, because I thought that I was going to get this additional benefit from something maybe a little bit less important, like a mobile ad text versus a non-mobile one.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're just about at the limit here for our time. I don't see any more questions. So, Fred, this was an awesome presentation. We got a lot of feedback. Cheryl just wrote in, excellent seminar. Thank you. So lots of positive feedback. I loved it. Took a lot of notes. So as always, Fred, thank you.
Awesome. Well, my pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for attending. As people go out, if you do want to hear more about Main Street ROI, they can actually help you, and Phil's team can help you do an audit of your account. So if you want that, checkbox that. And if you want a demo of Optimizer, I'm more than happy to give you a one-on-one overview of that. So you can ask us this way, or you can just shoot us an email to frederick@optimizer.com. Or Phil, how do they get a hold of you if they want to talk to you?
Support@mainstreetroi.com.
Cool. So again, thank you everyone for attending. This has been awesome. Phil, thanks for organizing it, and everybody have a great Tuesday.
Thanks, Fred.